We've come to a new and very interesting section in the book of Revelation, chapter 12 through 15, which is the seven visions of holy war. Now, this is an interesting section because it provides a chronological framework for the book. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning of creation, to the book of Genesis, and we're going to narrate the war between God and Satan from Genesis all the way up until the second coming. In this section of the book is the ultimate rebuttal to anyone who would suggest that Revelation is chronologically locked up, that it's only in the future, some 7-year period, a 3.5-year period, or that it's only in the first century, etc. This is not the case. The book of Revelation is a book that is past, present, and future. And we would be wise to heed that as we read the text, and particularly as we get into these visions of holy war. These seven visions of holy war are similar to other sections in the book in that they're an arrangement of 7 parts. However, they're also very different. You will recall that the 7 seals were divided into a section of 4 plus 3, as were the trumpets, 4 plus 3. And after the 6th seal, and after the 6th trumpet, we had a breakaway to go look at 2 interlude visions. Well, the 7 visions of holy war do not have a 4 plus 3 structure, and they also will not have an interlude after item number 6. Rather, there will be interludes, wherever it wants to. In the first chapter, there will be an interlude. So it's similar to the rest of the book, but it's also very different. And the outline works as follows. First of all, there's the conflict between the serpent and the woman. Then there's a war between the serpent seed and the woman's seed. And then there's a persecution facilitated by the second beast, the false prophet or the land beast. And this is where we get the infamous 666 and the mark of the beast. Well, that persecution produces a lot of martyrs. And so this is why you get vision number 4, the Lamb and the 144,000 standing on Mount Zion, a picture of victory for the martyrs who did not receive the mark of the beast and lost their lives in turn. Then you will see an image of the church's mission throughout history, the proclamation of the gospel and the judgment as facilitated by the 3 angels. And then finally, this will lead us up to the Son of Man's harvest of the earth. All of these visions, the seals, the trumpets, the bowls, they all culminate with the second coming of Christ. And so these visions of holy war will do the same thing. And then finally, the saints' victory over the sea beast and their celebration by singing the song of Moses. And so where one vision begins and another one ends is not nearly as obvious as with the seals and the trumpets. And so you'll find that people do not have perfect agreement, but on where one thing ends and another begins. Nevertheless, there is general agreement that the sections should be divided into 7, as with the other parts of the book of Revelation. So let's get into the text. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. There are some similarities between this story and myths that can be found in the pagan world. Now, as soon as I say that, I recognize that some people are going to have a bout with religious fear. I've come to recognize that Christians who do not have much of a biblical education, do not have much of a theological education, if their entire thinking of the Bible has just been their nourishment in the world of all things church, they feel a little bit nervous when you point out to them that there are similarities between some stories in the Bible and stories that can be found in the pagan world, because they think if this is true, that the Bible's not true, They think that if anybody points this out, that you're necessarily attacking the Bible or something like that. And unbelievers are guilty of this as well. Oftentimes, you'll find unbelievers who will point out similarities between things in the Bible and things that show up in the pagan world, and they think that they've proved the Bible is a pagan derivative or something like that. But whether you have religious fear about this sort of thing, and so you just hide from it, or whether you're sort of a arrogant skeptic type, you need to recognize that the biblical writers engage with the pagan world in very sophisticated ways. We can think of the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 17 up on Mars Hill. And there he quotes a Stoic philosopher. He quotes Epictetus. He tells them in his attempts to evangelize them, even some of your prophets have said we are all his children. Because in Stoic philosophy, there is a one high moral God who made the world, and everybody comes from him. And so Paul is recognized that is a point of agreement between Christianity and Stoicism. Now, Paul is clearly not Stoic in all his thinking. The Stoics believed that the universe would end in a great fire, and then the universe, time would just repeat itself. You would exist in every universe, and the next time you exist, you'll do exactly the same thing, have all the same friends, all the same experiences in life, and this would just keep going on forever. Well, clearly, Paul's not a Stoic. He doesn't believe that. However, the Stoic notion that there is one God who made everything, one God who is higher than every other being, that is a point of contact between Christianity and Greek philosophy, where Paul felt he could reach out and possibly evangelize the Greeks there in Athens. But nobody accuses Paul of not really being a Christian because he quoted a pagan philosopher. And sometimes it's more complex than this. Think, for example, of the titles given to Christ and the titles given to Caesar. Caesar is called the Son of God, the only name under heaven by which men are saved, the high priest. His reign was called the good news, the gospel, etc. So when the Christians took these titles away from Caesar and gave them to Christ, this isn't because Christianity is a pagan religion. This isn't because we're some sort of pagan derivative, right? What they are saying is the titles you give to this blasphemer, the titles you give to Caesar do not rightly belong to him. Only one man is worthy of these titles, and it's Jesus. So this language that's been taken away from Caesar and given to Jesus is a way of honoring and worshiping Jesus, and it's a way of having a polemic against the nations. So when you see pagan patterns or ideas that resonate with biblical ones, you don't have to be afraid of this. This is not a problem. This doesn't disprove the Bible. It's just that the biblical writers are engaged with the unbelieving world. You have to be if you're going to save anybody. And so they're having a very sophisticated conversation. Now, stories resembling this one here in Revelation 12 can be found in virtually every religion of the ancient world. In Egypt, the mother goddess Isis is pursued by the red dragon Set or Typhon and flees to an island where she gives birth to the sun god Horus. In Ugaritic myth, the storm god Baal defeats the seven-headed serpent Leviathan. Right? We have something similar here, and sets up his kingdom. In Mesopotamia, Marduk, the god of light, kills the seven-headed dragon Tiamat, who had thrown down a third of the stars. So clearly some striking similarities here with the story in Revelation 12. So we're seeing here some striking similarities to Revelation 12. In Greco-Roman myth, the goddess Leto, pregnant with Apollo, is pursued by the dragon Python. She is rescued by Poseidon, who places her in safety on an island. After Apollo is born, he slays Python. So how do we interpret this? What do we do with this? Well, I think Osborne is precisely right when he says the purpose of this story is evangelistic, to say that what the Greeks have known only as myth has now been actualized in history, right? As in the story of Jesus Christ. One could say that the New Testament demythologizes Greco-Roman myth by historicizing it. What the pagans longed for in their myths has now become true in Jesus. Therefore, the form is both deliberate and brilliant, using what has in our time been called a redemptive analogy to present the gospel in such a way as to capture the interest and hearts of the non-Christian reader. As Paul quoting Epictetus in, you know, in Acts chapter 17, so Revelation is showing that the great myths, the great stories of the pagan world uh, were not true in their own right, but rather uh, the dim amount of light that those stories had and what they hoped for has taken on a true form in the person of Jesus Christ. Now, the key to understanding this story is not the pagan myths, though. It's like every other vision in in the Book of Revelation. We will only understand it by checking it against Old Testament language. The Old Testament language of Revelation is the key to its interpretation, and so that's going to be our focus from here on out. A great sign appeared in heaven: a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant, was crying out in birth pains, and the agony of giving birth. So the woman is going to function similarly to the great city in the last chapter. You remember that the great city had a lot of imagery put into it. Sometimes it had Jerusalem imagery. Sometimes it had Sodom imagery, sometimes Egypt, sometimes Jericho, etc. And yet the great city was not just any one of those cities. Rather, all of those cities were part and parcel of the imagery of the great city, which is a persecution system all over the world. Now, the woman is similar. She is going to have a number of images loaded into her. It's not just one thing. Now, what's clear is that the woman represents Eve, because we are here completing the story of Genesis chapter 3, the Proto-Evangelion, very famous text, where it says, I will put enmity between you, the serpent, and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So we see sort of a two-tier struggle taking place here. The woman will have conflict with the serpent, but the woman will give birth to seed which will have conflict with the serpent seed, the seed of Satan, the seed of the devil. Right? So you have two levels of conflict. Well, Genesis chapter 3 does not tell you how all this is going to pan out. It doesn't tell you how the woman and the serpent will have enmity. It doesn't tell you about the battle between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. That's what Revelation chapter 12 and 13 are. They are going back to Genesis 3, and they want to answer these questions and fill in the gaps. They want to show us how the war between the woman and the serpent and their two seeds, how this played out in history. And so we're going to have in this chapter, the serpent will try to deceive Eve again, right? Just like in Genesis 3. However, the story will be redeemed. Eve will not consent to the serpent. Right? Neither will her seed consent as Cain did. So back in Genesis, we had the woman who was deceived by the serpent, right? And kicked out of the garden. Everybody knows about that. And then her seed was also corrupted. Cain was influenced by the evil one and became a murderer. In fact, if you read Jewish literature from the Second Temple period, what you're going to find is that they attacked Cain more than they attacked Adam. Even though Adam got thrown out of the garden, Cain was the world's first murderer. And for that reason, he had even a worse reputation than Adam. And so back in Genesis, Eve and her seed were deceived by the evil one and did some horrible things. Well, here the story is going to be redeemed. Eve is not going to consent to the devil, and her seed is not going to be deceived by the devil. The story will be redeemed. However, you will recall that in the original story back in Genesis, the serpent is cursed to go upon the ground on his belly. Well, that aspect will show up here because Satan is going to be thrown out of heaven. He's going to be cast down to the earth. Just as the serpent was cast down to the earth in Genesis chapter 3, so he will be cast down again here. So every character in the story is redeemed here in the Revelation version, except for the serpent, who will again receive his fall to the ground. The woman has 12 stars on her head. She's in the sun. She has the moon under her feet. Well, this is how we know the woman represents the people of God, that she represents Israel, because we have this vision back in the book of Genesis, where the family of God is not yet an entire nation. It's not 12 tribes with a promised land. It's Jacob, his wife, and his 12 sons. That's the entire people of God. And look at the dream that Joseph has. He had still another dream and related it to his brothers and said, Lo, I have had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. He related it to his father and to his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to them, What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So in this story, the sun and the moon represent mom and dad, and the 11 stars bowing down to him are his brothers, which implies that he's a star too. Right? All the suns are stars. So here we find sun, moon, and stars, 12 stars, represent the people of God. Revelation scholars always pick up on this. They always tie this in, that the woman must represent the people of God as because of the celestial features that are borrowed here from Genesis 37. Interestingly enough, this imagery will continue throughout the Jewish period, throughout the Second Temple period. And I'm not going to read all this, but in the Testament of Naphtali, which is just a little bit older than the New Testament, there's this vision where Levi grabs a hold of the sun because he's going to be the priestly tribe. And Judah grabs a hold of the moon because he's the kingly tribe. And then there's 12 rays of light coming out from under Judah's feet, which clearly represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And so there are variations and there are differences, but this imagery of the sun, moon, and 12 stars representing the people of God, this consistently shows up in Jewish texts and Jewish thinking leading up to the New Testament period. And so if there are any Christians at in the original 7 churches who received the book of Revelation, they would certainly identify this. They would understand precisely who the woman is, that she is Israel. Another reason the woman is Israel is because she's pregnant, right? So sun, moon, and stars, an image from the Old Testament representing Israel, but a pregnant woman represents Israel oftentimes. This is one of the most prominent images of Israel in the Old Testament. And one in particular is very interesting. We look here at the book of Isaiah, chapters 26 and 27, where it says, Like a pregnant woman who writhes and cries out in her pangs when she is near to giving birth, so were we because of you, O Lord. We were pregnant, we writhed, but we have given birth to wind. We have accomplished no deliverance in the earth. In that day the Lord with his hard and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan the fleeing serpent, Leviathan the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. Now notice here, you have a pregnant woman who represents the people of God, writhing and crying out in birth pains. And then you have an enemy serpent who is also called a dragon. Every single one of these features will show up here in Revelation chapter 12. Right, so there's no question who the woman is. She is Eve, but she is also Israel. She's the people of God. She's, as we're going to see as the story unfolds, she is Israel up until the time of Christ, and then she is Israel continued in the form of the church after Christ. Right? The church is not the replacement of Israel per se. The church is the continuation, the organic continuation of Israel. Israel, covenant Israel, continues in the form of the church, as it says in Romans. We Gentile Christians have been grafted in to Israel's olive tree. Another one, who has heard such a thing? who has seen such things? Shall a land be born in one day? Shall a nation be brought forth in one moment? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she brought forth her children. Now, Paul does something similar in Galatians 4, where he takes the pregnant woman language of Zion out of Isaiah 54, and he says it's Jerusalem above, etc. So the point is, the pregnant woman, very common icon, very common picture in the Old Testament to represent the people of God. The woman's birth pains represent the persecution of the covenant community in the Messianic line during Old Testament times and the intertestamental period leading up to Christ's birth. The word for the woman being in pain during labor is not the usual word for labor pain. Asanizo is a common Greek verb used in intertestamental literature to describe the persecution of the Jews under foreign powers such as the Greeks. And in Revelation, the word is only used when either demonic forces or God inflicts someone. So here, we have supernatural persecution. Now the question is it physical, is it spiritual, or is it both? Obviously, Israel was persecuted up till the time of Christ. You think of Babylon, you think of the people in the land after they came back from exile. You think of the Greeks, Antiochus Epiphanes, in the Seleucid kingdom. There's all sorts of physical persecution under the Romans as well, but there's all sorts of spiritual persecution. Now, in context, the whole thing is about Genesis 3. Demonic deception was used to corrupt the woman. But now in this chapter, the new Eve represents, she's the woman, she's the people of God in their spiritual purity. She is not going to give in to the satanic deceptions of the serpent. And so, as we will see as we go, it is best to understand the persecution in this chapter as spiritual. The woman will not fall for it this time. Now, the physical persecution of God's people will be in chapter 13, when we discuss the conflict between the serpent seed and the woman seed. Right? So what we're doing here is we are continuing the discussion we had in the last chapter. The church is spiritually safe, empowered by the grace of God to not apostatize when persecuted. However, we are physically vulnerable to the violence of our enemies. Right? So chapter 12 will mostly focus, especially when talking about the woman, will focus on the spiritual safety, the spiritual purity of the church. But the next chapter will again re-examine the physical vulnerability of the church, and we will see no martyrs being produced. Obviously, this is a very controversial subject. Is Mary part of the imagery? Now, I'm not Catholic, but I bought a book about a year and a half ago, etc., from a Catholic writer, Michael Fries, and it was called The Catholic Perspective on the End Times. And he divided the book into two types of revelation, into public revelation and to private revelation. Right? So private revelation is, someone came to me in the middle of the night and this is what they said. Public revelation is things like the scripture. And I was really intrigued because when the author got to Revelation chapter 12, he just stopped and he focused on trying to prove that the woman standing in the sun was a reference to Mary. And he spent a lot of time there. And at that point in time, I thought, well, this is really strange that, Catholics are really hung up on this Mary thing. They're trying to squeeze her into the book of Revelation. She doesn't fit. We know that there's Eve imagery. We know that there's Zion imagery. Why are they, sticking Mary in here? Well, over time, studying and reading and thinking, etc., I've come to believe that there is a reference to Mary in this chapter. Now, I'm not a Catholic. I don't pray the rosary. I don't say Hail Marys. Mary does not occupy the position in my faith practice that she occupies for Catholic people. All right, but I want to show you why Mary may be part of the imagery. Yes, Eve is used here. to represent the people of God. But is Mary a sort of new Eve that is being used here as a symbol to represent the people of God? But first, I want to share a couple of Protestant quotations with you. Richard Bauckham says, and he's Protestant, all right? He's a great Revelation scholar, the best in my opinion. He says that the woman in Revelation 12 is the mother of Jesus and of Christians. Eve and Mary, Israel, Zion, and the church, all combined in an image of the spiritual essence of the covenant people of God. Now notice he is not Catholic, and yet he accepts that Mary is part of the imagery. Now, Nelson Crable, who wrote what I think is the best introductory book on Revelation out there, he is a Mennonite. All right. Now, the Mennonites come from the Radical Reformation. And if you know anything about the Radical Reformation, you know that they rejected Martin Luther because they thought he was too Catholic. All right. So these are the Protestants of Protestants, Protestants par excellence. And when he interprets this passage, look at what he says. On one level, this is an icon of Mary in labor before the birth of Jesus. The male child she delivers is to rule all the nations with the rod of iron. The early church understood this citation of Psalm 2 as pointing to Christ. Right? The son who rules all the nations with the rod of iron from Psalm 2, this shows up throughout the New Testament time and time again, pointing to Jesus. That's how we know the child she's about to give birth to is Jesus, among other ways of knowing. In addition to representing Mary, the woman likely is a symbol of the whole people of God. Now, the reason I shared this with you is because I think a lot of people are going to assume that if you're Catholic, you see Mary in Revelation 12, and if you're a Protestant, you don't, and that it's just that easy, it's just that simple. Well, again, this is not true. All right, here are two great Protestant scholars, and I could add other ones here that are open to the idea. G.K. Bill, Grant Osborne, they're both open to the notion that Mary is part of the imagery. And so by saying that Mary might be part of the imagery is not to be Catholic. All right. Yes, Catholics are into this big time. All right. But I'm not Catholic, and I think there may very well be a reference to Mary. And the reason for this is John's Gospel. John's Gospel and Revelation are written by the same guy. And when you look in John's Gospel, Mary is both a symbol of God's people, and she is the new Eve. Right? She's both Jesus' mother, and she is symbolically the bride of Christ. Right? Very specific set of qualities in John's Gospel. Well, this woman in Revelation has all the exact same qualities. Right? So I want to explore this a little bit. First of all, we have to know something about John's Gospel. John's Gospel, the beginning of it is just like the beginning of Genesis, and this is on purpose. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's Genesis. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And if you can read this in Greek, you can tell especially that he is trying to quote the book of Genesis. Why is he doing this? Well, he believes that Jesus is the beginning of new creation. All right? So he presents his gospel as a new book of Genesis. Now, after introducing his book with Genesis language, John's gospel is going to have a 7-day progression. I mean, of course, because the book of Genesis begins with a 7-day creation, right? So, and it's interesting how this works. In day 1, John is baptizing people at the Jordan River. Then it will say, the next day he saw Jesus coming toward him. This is day 2. Then it will say, the next day, again, John was standing with 2 of his disciples. That's day 3. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. That's day 4. And then it will say, on the 3rd day, there was a wedding at Cana. Now, he can't mean on the 3rd day, of the whole story, because we've already been through day 3. And he wasn't at a wedding at Cana. He was far away from Cana. So what this means is you get to day 4, and then you skip to day 7. Right? He takes you through a 7-day sequence because he's presenting the story of Jesus as a new creation story. And then that's when Jesus performs his first miracle. So the creation of marriage was the high point of the creation week. Right? The creation stories, Genesis 1, Genesis 2, we can tell that marriage was uniting Adam and Eve as one flesh. This was like a really big deal to the author of the creation story. Now it's interesting, the first week in John culminates with a marriage in Cana, right? So we have Genesis, we have 7-day imagery, and of course it's going to culminate with a marriage scene, just as the creation week in Genesis did. Now you would expect at the marriage scene, it's going to focus on a male and a female. It's going to focus on the bridegroom, and it's going to focus on his bride. But interestingly enough, the author does not focus on the two who are getting married at Cana. It focuses on Jesus as a new Adam and Mary as a new Eve. Right? Eve encouraged Adam to partake of the fruit of the tree, but Mary encourages Jesus to provide fruit of the vine. Right? Now, when I say that she's his mother, but symbolically she plays the role of Eve, the wife of Adam, you don't go, oh, well, that's just creepy. This is his mom, and now you're trying to say that there's a symbolic relationship here where he's a man and she represents Eve, the wife. But look, John does this all the time. Right? Later on in the book of Revelation, a lamb is going to marry a woman, right? But nobody looks at that and goes, oh, well, technically, that's an improper relationship. That's animality. That's a human being coming into a romantic relationship with an animal. No. Everybody knows this is symbolic. Right? Same thing happens when Jesus goes to the Samaritan woman. There he represents Yahweh coming for his bride, who's the Samaritan woman. She represents Israel, and he tells her, you've had 5 husbands, and the one you currently have is not even a husband. Well, this represents the 5 empires that the people of Israel cheated on Yahweh with, worshiped their gods. And the 6th one, who's not even counted as a husband, that is a derogatory reference toward Rome. Right? And so this type of symbolism, extremely common in John's gospel, and you don't get over technical with it and say, oh, that's weird, because he does stuff like this all the time. There was symbolic stuff going on here. Now, when she encourages Jesus to provide fruit of the vine, Jesus responded by calling her woman, a term that could be used for other women without disrespect, but not one that a son would use for his mother. This peculiar interchange enables readers to see that Jesus' actions cannot be understood on the level of typical relations between mother and son. In other words, the point is John is not showing you that Jesus and his mom couldn't get along or that Jesus liked to disrespect his mother. All right? You're getting a cue here to read the story differently, that we've entered a symbolic realm where the conversation between Jesus and Mary is not the historical mother of Jesus and the historical Jesus, but now we're talking on a different level. We're talking on the level of Adam and Eve. All right, he calls her woman because she is the new Eve. She's the representative woman, and the story is being redeemed. Mary is the new Eve of the new creation week, but she is not under the influence of the serpent. She does not deceive or disobey, and does not desire the fruit of the forbidden tree for herself, but rather the fruit of the vine that represents the messianic kingdom for others. Right? So the woman wanted in the first Eve, wanted this fruit of the forbidden tree for herself and for her husband. Well, Mary wants the fruit of the vine, the wine that represents the messianic kingdom in Isaiah 25 and Genesis 49 and other places. Wine is associated with the kingdom of God. She wants the wine that represents the kingdom of God for other people. Right? So she is a redeemed form of Mary. This is why she's present in a context of Genesis, a redeemed form of Eve. And that's why she's in the context of Genesis, the 7 days of creation, and a marriage setting, and trying to get some type of fruit, because she represents the new Eve. Now, Mary will disappear from John's gospel until the very end of the story, at the crucifixion. Interestingly enough, that is right when we get back into the Garden of Eden, and we start our Adam and Eve symbolism all over again. Jesus is in a garden, at the time of Gethsemane, his crucifixion, his resurrection. And by the way, none of the other Gospels specifically tell you that John was in a garden or Jesus was in a garden. They tell you he was in Gethsemane, but they don't tell you it was a garden. John specifically points out that Jesus is in a garden 3 times because he wants you to understand that he is the new Adam. Adam was placed in a garden. Jesus is only called a gardener in John's Gospel after his resurrection. Jesus is referred to as the man on Friday, the day of his crucifixion. Now, this is interesting that Pontius Pilate says, "Behold the man," in reference to Jesus on the 6th day of the week, because Adam was made on the 6th day of the week. All right, so there's a lot of sophisticated and complex Genesis stuff taking place in John's Gospel. And this is where Eve shows up. And again, she's the representative woman. She is Eve. Just as he had told her earlier, "Woman, what between you and me?" Now he says, "Woman, behold your son," talking about the beloved disciple. All right. And so it's interesting here. Okay. Mary only shows up when we're doing the creation week, the marriage of creation, or the Garden of Eden. And never does Jesus talk to her like she's his mom, because there's symbolic stuff going on here. He always calls her woman because she is the new Eve. She is the new woman of this story. He's not disrespecting her. Right? There's just symbolic stuff that goes deeper than that. Cloister says that Mary is also a symbol for God's people. In fact, lots of people say this. All right? She's not only Eve, she is a symbol for the people of God. And we know this because Mary is always contrasted with the disobedient. Right where Mary is believing and obedient, well, right after that, there's a mention of somebody who is unbelieving and disobedient. Right? So she represents the faithful disciples. She represents God's peoples. Now, as he points out, the soldiers cast lots for Jesus' garments, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and the other women. The soldiers appear negatively as those crucifying Jesus, but the women appear positively as those present in faith. Earlier, Jesus' mother appeared as a positive example at Cana, in contrast to the negative examples of the bystanders in the temple. She displayed uncomprehending trust in Jesus, while the crowds reflected uncomprehending skepticism at Jesus' words and actions. At the cross, the mother of Jesus continues to exemplify discipleship. And it's interesting that the evangelist also contrasts her with other members of Jesus' family. Remember, there are several scenes in John's Gospel where Jesus' brothers, whoever they are, they're not named, Jesus' brothers are, they don't believe in Jesus. But his mother does, right? So they're family by blood, but they are not family by faith. Well, Mary exemplifies what it means to be family by blood and also family by faith, because she believes in Jesus. What's the point of all this? All right, I took way more time on the Mary thing than I should have, but the reason I took so much time on this is because I think that there are a lot of people who don't hear this stuff, right? Because Protestants are afraid to explore whether or not Mary might be in this text because they think it'll make them Catholic. Well, I'm not Catholic, right? But I think she's at least part of the imagery. She's not the whole thing. She's not even the predominant reference. As long as you recognize this woman represents the people of God before Christ and after Christ, then you will interpret the chapter well, right? But the point here is that Genesis says Eve will give birth to the Messiah. Mary gave birth to the Messiah, making her Eve. John's Gospel seems to say Mary is the new Eve and a symbol of God's people. The woman of Revelation 12 is Eve and a symbol of God's people. Later on, we will see that the woman in Revelation is not only the mother of the Messiah, she becomes the bride of the Messiah. Symbolism, again, right? So in John's Gospel, where the woman represents the mother of Jesus historically, but symbolically represents the bride of Jesus, that's just too much of a striking connection to Revelation to be dismissed. Now, if you just do not want to see Mary in this text, that's fine. I don't care, right? It's not my job to persuade you that there is an allusion to Mary here. If there is, I think you can only really find it by connecting it with John's Gospel, which is an acceptable thing to do because the two books were written by the same guy. But again, I'm not Catholic. I don't pray the Rosary. So if you choose to not believe Mary's here, well, great. Good for you. But anyway, I think she may be part of the imagery, and this is why. It says the sun, she's standing in the sun, the stars are on her head, and the moon is at her feet. Now, is there anything that can be made of the relative position of the sun, moon, and stars associated with the woman? Well, first of all, royal figures wear crowns, which is probably why she has a crown on her head, right? Bright, majestic clothing, which is why she's standing in the sun, and she has a footstool under her feet as a token of dominion, the moon. So in other words, the woman is royalty, right? Because she's going to marry the king of the universe in an upcoming chapter. So she has a head with a crown. She has a crown. She has bright clothing. She has a footstool under her feet. All of this is just majestic imagery. Now, I don't for 1 minute believe that this is a reference to Virgo, right? The constellation in the sky, standing in the sun, moon under her feet, and that you're supposed to wait and look for this combination of elements on a starry night program. And then when that happens, the rapture's coming or the end of the world or the tribulation or something like that. Now, why not? Well, one, there are no other constellation images in the book of Revelation, right? And two, that wouldn't help us understand the narrative context of Revelation. If you identify the woman as Virgo, well, when she gets an eagle's wings and she's in the desert and she's being nourished by God, etc., well, how did the Virgo image help you interpret any of that material? Right? It's not useful. It's not helpful. And most importantly, the guys on the internet who are trying to show you when Virgo is going to be like this, with stars on her head, moon under her feet, those guys are just ripping this out of context. They're trying to make this about the second coming. Well, when she has 12 stars on her head and moon under her feet, this is before Jesus is born, right? He's about to be born in like the next verse. And this is about the first coming of Christ. It's not about the second coming of Christ. And people will say, well, no, it's about both. Well, no, it's not, right? It's about the first coming of Christ. This story moves in chronological order, this section. So we get to the second coming of Christ in Revelation 14, and there's no mention of the woman with stars on her head and the moon under her feet, because this is not an image for the second coming. This is all about the first coming, right? So the Virgo imagery, as cool as that is, right, as interesting as that is, there's just no evidence for it. It's just strange. She is standing in the sun because she is the light of the world, and the moon is under her feet because she has conquered the night. In John's Gospel, the night is often symbolic for a time of darkness, such as when Nicodemus comes to Jesus under the cover of nightfall. So this is possibly part of the imagery. The heavenly creation is attached to her because God's plans to renew the universe are intertwined with her story. Right? So we're going to see this woman again, but next time we see her, the creation has been remade. Right? The creation has been redeemed. And you will recall in Romans 8, I mention this verse all the time, that the creation is suffering and it's waiting for us to be redeemed, because when we get redeemed, it gets redeemed too. Well, people have seen that here. The reason all these icons of creation are around her is because when the people of God are redeemed, the creation will be redeemed also. Now, these three ideas here are not mutually exclusive. It could be a combination of all of them. I would say that at the very least, the stars, the sun, and the moon have been arranged to show that she is royalty. She gets a crown, she gets majestic clothing, she gets a footstool to say that she is royal, she's royalty. That at the very least is the point, but these other 2 points may be part of it as well. Another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. Let's talk about the red dragon. First of all, it's red because red is the color of war. It's reminiscent of the red horseman. Remember, the white horse went out to conquer, but what was uh, what was really intense was he was followed by a red horseman who had a great sword who took peace from the earth. Right, so the colors are used consistently. Revelation is consistent in symbolism, and so we find that we have a horse here who is red, uh, because it's the color of war, and so the dragon is the same way. Drakon, the word used for dragon here, is also used for the word Leviathan uh, in Job, in Psalm, and Isaiah. Now it's interesting, you have these passages in the Old Testament that tell you when God made the world, he defeated a sea dragon, right? He defeated a monster. And those are really strange texts, but what Revelation is doing is it's trying to show you who the dragon is, who God has butt kicked at the beginning of creation. It's trying to show you that this is Satan. As we're going to see in a moment, Satan fell at the beginning of creation, right? And so the dragon who gets defeated at the beginning of creation is the devil, and so that's why he's called dragon here, not just the serpent, but dragon as well. Now I don't want to harp on this point too much, but you can tell in this chapter the devil's called the dragon and a serpent. Well, that's because these two words, dragon and serpent, are used interchangeably in the Old Testament. The serpent that deceived the Eve is ophis in the Greek Bible. That's the same word used for serpent here. He's called the serpent that is Aaron's rod is called a drakon, the word that's used for dragon here. So these two words are very interchangeable in the Old Testament. Revelation is just continuing that interchangeability. He has 7 heads and 7 crowns. This represents a parity of God's rule. Remember that 3 is oftentimes the number associated with God's rule in heaven. 4 is the number of all creation. So when you add them together, 4 plus 3, well, this represents God ruling over all of his creation through the person of Jesus, through the Messiah. Right? And so Satan is not an original artist, he's just a cover band. And throughout this book, he's just copying God. Right? So he's gonna be a parody. He's going to pass himself off as the true God, when in fact he's an imposter. We have another shape to add to the numerical story of Revelation, the 10-horned dragon. The 10 horns, that is a triangular number. We've already seen this before when Satan imprisons the church for 10 days, and we saw that 6 is also a triangular number, 6 classes of idolaters in chapter 6. And so triangles, again, are evil, squares are righteous, and rectangles they represent conflict between what is good and what is evil. Right? We've already seen that the martyrs, 144,000, that is a square number compared to the altar, because the altar is square, the place where the martyrs are sacrificed, where they cry out in Revelation 11 and in Revelation 6. The courtyard is a perfect rectangle. We talked all about this back in chapter 11. The courtyard is the primary place of conflict between the beast and the church, and so rectangular numbers represent that period of conflict. And now we have 3 triangular numbers, 3 evil numbers. We haven't compared them to anything yet, but we will in a further chapter. And so we'll just keep moving and see how many more shapes we can add to the board and what kind of story they tell. The dragon's offense. He casts a third of stars down to the earth. Now, in antiquity, a dragon's tail is often depicted as its weapon in literature. Now, the only other mention of tails are in Revelation 9, where they refer to the tails of the demonic locusts and the serpent-like tails of the horses. In both cases, the tails are similar to that of the dragon. They are powerful, demonic, and spiritually deceptive. And so when he casts a third of stars to the earth with his tail, this has traditionally been interpreted to be him bringing down a third of the angels. Now, everyone is not in agreement with that point, as you might think, because this imagery comes from Daniel, where it does not refer to the devil, but in fact it refers to a human king, Antiochus Epiphanes, a Greek king who is persecuting the people of God. It says, a rather small horn, this is the king, Antiochus Epiphanes, a rather small horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. It grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. It removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. Now, Daniel is a tough and complex book. I wrote a 20-something page paper on Daniel this week for seminary. There's a lot to it. But if you go through the book of Daniel and you see that Antiochus Epiphanes, the guy who at the period of the Maccabean revolt cut off the sacrifice in Jerusalem and was persecuting Jews and not allowing them to circumcise their children, etc. He tried to essentially just scrub the land of Israel free of Yahwism, of the worship of the one true God. Well, it's interesting. It says that he caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth and trampled them down. Well, a Greek king could not do this. So what is going on? Well, in the book of Daniel, the host of heaven, the angels, represent nations. And there are angels who represent the people of God. This shows up in chapter 10 and in chapter 12. And so when it says that he threw stars to the earth, it is probably, it is probably saying that when he attacked God's people, he was attacking the representative of God's people. In other words, to attack God's people is to attack Israel's angels. To attack Israel's angels is to attack Israel, and vice versa. All right, it's a weird thing, I know, but if you look at Daniel, it makes sense. All right, an attack on God's angels is to attack God's people. To attack God's people is to attack God's angels. Therefore, some people think that this is not Satan taking a third of the angels. This is him attacking the God's people on the earth. Because in Revelation, stars can represent the saints, they can represent Christ himself or angelic beings. Now, I am in disagreement with this. I agree with the traditional interpretation that this is Satan misleading the angels of heaven. The angels who follow Satan will be mentioned in the immediate context in verse 7. All right, so to see that Satan has angels following him here in a few verses, in preparation for that, we are here being told about the time when Satan was able to get angels to follow him at the beginning of the creation. Now, the allusions to Eve in Genesis suggest these stars fell at the beginning of creation, which would make sense in light of what we know about Judaism at the time. Jews believed that Satan and his host fell either before or during the creation week. In Daniel, the horn casting down the stars was King Antiochus and launching an attack on God's people, which was compared to an attack on the heavenly host itself. In Revelation, the imagery is upgraded. The dragon launches an attack against heaven directly by conscripting a third of the heavenly army. Right? So I think this is definitely, the woman and the serpent have enmity from the beginning of creation. Right? From the very beginning, they have enmity. They are enemies. He persecutes her all the way up until the time that she gives birth to the Messiah, which is what we will look at next week. He casts a third of stars down. The reason this occurs so early in the story is because a third of stars followed the devil since the time of the creation. This is when this rebellion took place. For an ancient reader, they understood it was either during the creation week or before the creation week. You can find both ideas in ancient Judaism. Right? And so here we are. We've arrived at the point where the stars are cast to the earth. We've seen the woman, identified her. She is Eve. She is Mary, but these are just symbols that represent the people of God. Mary is the new Eve that represents God's people. So the focus of the woman is not necessarily going to be historical Eve or historical Mary. It's going to be the people of God. The dragon is the devil. The third of the stars he brings to earth are the angels who fell with him at the beginning of creation. And so next week we will begin to look at the Messiah and what happens after the Messiah is taken up in his ascension and he goes to heaven. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Being caught up to God and his throne is a reference to the ascension of Christ. You see this discussed many times in Scripture, in Hebrews, in the book of Acts, etc. Paul talks about this when Jesus went up to the Father and sat down at his right hand. He began to reign, and he must continue to reign until all things are placed under his feet. This is the ascension of Jesus. Now, it is problematic to the devil that the man-child is destined to rule the nations, since that is currently the devil's position. Remember what he says in Luke chapter 4, I will give you all this domain, talking about the political realm. The political realm is the satanic realm. I will give you all this domain and its glory, for it has been handed over to me, and I wish it to whomever I will. So if Jesus has gone to the right hand of the Father and begun to reign, then that means the devil is about to be out of a job. And so clearly, the child here who is ascended to the Father, he has just defeated the serpent. Now, it says that she gave birth to a male son. This ties back into our Old Testament context in Isaiah 66, where it says, before she travailed, she brought forth. Before her pain came, she gave birth to a boy, Arson. Now, Isaiah 66 very specifically tells you that the child is a male, so that you can understand he is destined to rule. He is destined to be king. And so this is what Revelation is doing. It's just being consistent with this Old Testament passage, specifying that it's a male child because he is destined to rule and to reign. Notice there is no reference to Jesus' death or resurrection, only to his ascension. Now, this is because this passage is not at all focused on the physical death of Jesus. Or, the woman represents the people of God in all their purity, and the serpent cannot spiritually corrupt her. And here, the serpent is trying to spiritually corrupt Jesus, and he cannot do so. Now, there's no reference to the serpent physically harming the woman or physically harming the son. That's why there's no reference to Jesus' death or resurrection. It's as though he just was born and he ascended into heaven. In other words, throughout his whole lifespan, from his birth to his ascension, the serpent never succeeded in corrupting him. Now, the devil's attempted assaults on Jesus and the church correspond to the sanctuary that was measured in chapter 11. Remember, the primary point of chapter 11 was that the people of God are spiritually safe, but we are physically vulnerable. So here with the woman and the child, the serpent is trying to spiritually seduce them, spiritually harm them, but he cannot do so because they are empowered by the grace of God. And we'll find in the next chapter again that we'll begin to look at the physical vulnerability of the people of God. But that's not what we're looking at here. Spiritual safety, not physical safety, means that there is no reference here to Herod and the slaughter of the innocents. Many people do this. The woman gives birth to the child, and the dragon tries to consume him and does not succeed. And they go, oh, well, this is like in Matthew's gospel. This is where Jesus is born, and Herod tries to kill him. Now, that just doesn't work here. As we've seen, there's no reference to the physical harm of Jesus. Now, if this was concerned with the physical welfare of Jesus, it would mention how the dragon succeeds in killing Jesus, all right? But this is not referenced. And by the way, Herod trying to kill Jesus is only in Matthew's gospel. John, when he wrote his gospel, he doesn't narrate that. Mark doesn't narrate that. Luke doesn't narrate that. So trying to take that context of Matthew and force it in here in Revelation is a very dubious claim, all right? Now, Satan did succeed in physically harming Jesus, as it says in John 13:27. After the morsel, Satan then entered into him. Therefore, Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. And what does it say in 1 Corinthians? The wisdom which none of the rulers of this age has understood, for if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. So Satan does succeed in physically killing Jesus. But in our chapter here in Revelation, the dragon doesn't succeed in harming Jesus. Why? Again, it's because we're looking at spiritual harm. This is Genesis chapter 3. This is the serpent trying to destroy by spiritual deception. Jesus doesn't fall for it. Quite to the contrary, Jesus spiritually defeats Satan and ascends to the right hand of the Father. Remember, Jesus said to him, "Be gone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." And in John, the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. So, in this chapter, we have seen that the woman is Mary, the new Eve, representing the people of God. She is the people of God are not eliminated, are not harmed by the dragon before the birth of Christ. Christ is not harmed by the dragon, and the woman won't be harmed by the dragon after this point. She is invincible, just like Christ was invincible. This is a reference to our spiritual safety. However, Christ was killed by the dragon, and many Christians are killed by the dragon. Therefore, the physical safety and well-being of Christians is not referenced in this chapter. That is for an upcoming passage, Revelation chapter 13.